Ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between, welcome to Part 1 Endgame of my Fire Emblem 10 Hard Mode 0% Gross playthrough. I'm Dondon151, and who better to join me for the finale of the Dondon Brigade than Raisins?
That's right, the biggest fan of the Don Brigade here with all of the GOAT units, the Black Knight, Nyla, Rafiel. Really just like an absolutely absurdly cracked team over here for this chapter. How do you feel about this chapter, Dondon?
This is one of my favorite chapters in the game. It's super unique in terms of its structure. You're fighting a literal uphill battle against Jared and the occupying Benyan forces, and you have a hodgepodge of some of the most broken units in the game. This is the strongest the Don Brigade will ever be, even though they have future chapters to play, and I'm just salivating at the mouth to use all of these strong tools. But before we get to the chapter proper, Raisins, why don't you tell us about our preps, because they're pretty complicated in this segment.
Yeah, so actually the most important thing about the preps is not the items that we're bringing, but rather the items that we're not bringing. It turns out that the Don Brigade is just so powerful that we can afford to not deploy our best skills and our best items, and instead we ship them over to the stupid Grail Mercs, who need them a whole lot more than we do. So many items will actually be giving to Ilyana, who will deliver them to the Grail Mercs in Chapter 3-2. And she is going to be sending them a Forged Fire Tome, a Brave Sword, a Hammer, as well as these skills Celerity, Savior, Shade, Resolve, and a small bit of money just to help them out. Now, one important thing that she is not bringing actually is the Paragon Scroll. So what are the plans for the Paragon Scroll in this chapter?
We're actually leaving the Paragon Scroll on Zhark, which can seem like a questionable decision because the Paragon Scroll is usually better in 0% growth to be transferred to the Grail Mercs, since they have better units to start out with, and they have better potential when promoted. But we need to leave the Paragon Scroll on Zhark because his EXP goals are so tight that he needs every little bit that he can squeeze out of this chapter, and we'll see in the end that it was worth it, and that the Grail Mercenaries really, in fact, did not need that Paragon Scroll. He also got 2 Mega Steel Sword Forges. This is the first and last chapter in the Dawn Brigade where you have access to Steel Weapon Forges, and so this is the only chance that you have to prepare them for Part 3, where you don't have access to them anymore, and the forging team ends up going to the Grail Mercenaries as well. So the key for this chapter is it's divided into 3 kind of like sections: the base floor, a middle floor, and then the top floor. And in order to get from the base floor to the middle floor, we have to fight our way up some ledges or a narrow staircase on the right. You might think that the best way, in general, is to not split your team up, because that's how it usually goes in Fire Emblem when the game wants to split your team. You probably shouldn't, but this is one exception because we're so constrained on space that if we sent our entire team up one way or another, we would end up having to deal with a logjam of units who just cannot fit in the narrow corridors. So we send one half of our units to the right and annihilate them with the Black Knight, who one-rounds things even when carrying someone, and we send another half of our units to the left up the ledges to navigate those with Nyla.
So this sort of dual path approach is really key to maximizing Rafiel's 4-way dance, which requires sort of 3 things in order for the dance to be profitable whatsoever. The first is that we actually have a lot of space at our landing zone, which we're sort of accomplishing by now by dropping Rafiel in range of this mid-segment where you can see there's plenty of space for Rafiel to execute the 4-way dance as opposed to in the hallway. It also requires a lot of good rescuing in order to bring him into position. And then the last kind of not necessarily obvious thing is that you need powerful units in position for him to dance. Now, 2 such powerful units are Morim and Vika. However, they have an issue where they don't start transformed, and they need to be transformed by turn 2 and turn 3, respectively. So they're each able to take a sip of Olivi Grass, which gives them 15 out of the 30 gauge that they need, but this is actually not enough. So I believe we use a small manipulation where they get attacked in order to build up some extra gauge. If they get attacked by an enemy, and they don't counterattack while untransformed, then they build up 15 gauge. And this will allow them to transform more quickly and get the augmented stats and augmented movement and augmented rescuing required for the strategies and moving of Rafiel later on in this chapter.
One unit who rounds out our army of behemoths is Fiona. She seems quite out of place here next to units like the Black Knight, Nyla, Morim, Vika, Toragod, and Zhark. But she plays a pretty important role here with her ability to canto and move after rescuing someone to hand off Soth and later on Micaiah. I don't actually think she's necessary for this role, but I want her to be useful in some respect, so if you're a Fiona fan, raise your glass and cheers to you. One thing that we have to be really careful of when placing Rafiel anywhere is to clear out the surrounding neighborhood of any threatening enemies. We did just that with Nyla, who sniped an archer on the level that's above where Rafiel's at. That archer has an Iron Longbow with 3 range, and he would be able to move to attack Rafiel with the 50% hit bonus. Rafiel folds to pretty much any attack at this point in the game, aside from maybe an isolated magic enemy, like the ones in 1-8, so we really need to keep him safe from anything possible.
Yeah, no, and it's always really interesting to see like how specific knowledge of AI in the maps helps out with that sort of like plan, because I remember like the moment you said, oh, we need to keep Rafiel safe from enemies, there was like 3 guys next to him, but they're thieves who don't attack, and there's an armor knight who doesn't move, which is like very specific knowledge, which ended up being extremely helpful in this case. So right now, I think you actually did trap these thieves. They don't attack, but rather they try to go for the treasure chests. But instead you use, I believe here it's Volug and Soth to completely trap all of their paths to the chest, which just immobilizes them completely and forces them to sit still the whole time. This makes them very easy pickings for Zhark, who can just come up and kill both of them for heaps of EXP, just a ridiculous amount. I think they give increased EXP as compared to other enemies. So this Thief EXP is very welcome, considering that we were unable to move the Paragon to the Grail Mercenaries.
By this point in turn 3, we've amassed a bundle of units right below the door that leads to the top floor where the seize point is. In fact, we are so far ahead of schedule at this point that Nyla had nothing to do on the previous turn. She just sat there. I probably could have had her like glare the priest just for the shits and giggles, but it wouldn't have done anything, and glare's hit rate really sucks. But the reason why we waited for the final turn to break down the door is because once we do so, 3 additional armor knights show up to block our way to Jared. So we need a bit of offense to break through them. That's why we have so many units up here. There's 2 armor knights that we have to break through, and the boss. The other reason why we have everyone up here is for them to grab all of the side objectives. So the first one that we're getting is the Speed Wings, which Jill's going to grab, and that one we're going to save for much later in the game.
Yeah, so with the whole rescue drop and the taking and the giving and whatnot, you can see that this army can actually exert a surprising amount of presence over a surprising distance. Micaiah went from, I think, the staircase all the way to right in front of Jared on this one turn. And then with the Rafiel dance, it's pretty obvious to see how we're going to be able to seize the throne this turn. So the only remaining thing to do with our actions is to pick up one of these chests. We could either get the Parody on the left or the Vantage on the right. And I think casually many players would prefer to go for the Parody, just because it ends up being extremely helpful on 4e5 just to deal more damage to auras. But I think your clear of that ended up not really benefiting from that, so you're just going to go for the Vantage instead, which ends up being massively helpful for your 3-12 clear, if not outright mandatory for it. Nyla combo warps it back using her inventory full of garbage, herbs, and vulneraries. This is very necessary because otherwise it would be in her inventory until she rejoins in 4-1.
So once Jared takes the second elf from the Black Knight, Micaiah can seize and finish one endgame in 4 turns. She's rewarded afterwards with her story-based promotion to her second tier class, Light Sage. I love seeing Lords promote in 0% growths because their stats are always so pathetic, and Micaiah's are no exception, but she does gain access to staffs, which renders as one of the better promotions in the series. We won't get to use her for a while because next time we'll be starting off in part 2. See you then.
That's right, until next time.